and welcome to this episode of How to Start, Grow and Monetize Your Podcast with me, James Burtt, and him over there, the podpreneur, Alex Chisnall. Today's episode is all about the importance of having a goal when you start your podcast. Now, you might be thinking, well, James and Al, what do I need? I just want to make it. I just want the thing out there. I just want it on YouTube. I just want to be able to go onto Apple or Spotify. I just want to hear my dulcet tones on the airwaves. Why do I need to think about it more deeply than that? But I think it's really, 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 anytime you're going to go on a new venture or adventure, I think it's really important to draw a line in the sand and have an outcome that you're trying to achieve and a goal that you're chasing, because ultimately, otherwise, it's like going on a journey without a map. You don't know where you're trying to get to. What's your take on the importance of having a goal for your podcast? Alex Chisnall.
Ask Johnny.
Wow, okay. You're going to need to give a little bit of context for those who are not regular subscribers. I mean, shame on you if you're not a regular subscriber.
Wow. If you don't know who Johnny is, you need to go back to episode 0, the show trailer, and go through the entire back catalogue. So,
no, you don't, by the way. For those who've just gone, I don't need another full-time job. Just go back to a couple of episodes ago where we talked about listener avatars.
Exactly that one. Listener avatar. So our listener avatar, we have decided, is Johnny, okay?
Johnny be good.
Johnny is the person who is our ideal listener avatar, okay? Which is you, because you're listening to this show right now.
Cheers, Johnny.
And I would go and ask Johnny, because every decision that you ever want to make around your podcast, you should ask your ideal client, your ideal listener avatar, okay? Same as if you're a business, you have an ideal customer avatar. So literally, Johnny, what is the goal for this podcast? You know, where do you want this podcast to go? What does podcast success look like for you? And this could be either, I think, you know, before you're starting your podcast, and the first thing you do, if you've listened to that previous episode, you map out who your ideal listener avatar is, or you've already started your podcast and you've set yourself another goal. Like, you know, again, when I started mine, it was, 2 years in that I decided to take it, in inverted commas, seriously. And I set myself a goal. And that goal was to get #1 podcast in the UK.
And what happened? What happened? Don't leave us on tenterhooks, Alex Chisnall. What happened? You get to tell me before I get to outside of my vocal range. Oh, he did it, everybody. He did it. That was underwhelming.
Did it in 6 months, not a year. I set myself a goal to do it within 12 months. And I did it in the June. Julian Hearn, Huel, that episode.
That's a really important point. Setting a time frame for your goal. Carry on, sorry, I'll come back to that.
Yeah, and again, it comes down to, I think, again, as we said right at the beginning of this show, anything in life, don't be afraid to dream really big, because even if you may not reach that massive goal that you've set yourself, but you could have reached far higher than you would have thought if you'd set a lower goal.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? If I'd set a goal that I wanted to get top 50 in the UK and I ended up with top 20, okay?
Still good.
Still good. It's still good. But you need, as you said, that picturing your head a map and knowing where you want to get to, and it's not going to be north to south, one direction, a straight line. It's going to be left, right, round the roundabout, hang a right at the lights, then 30 yards up the road. But you need to have a clear goal. Put a time limit on it. How can you measure that goal? If you're putting a chart position on it, or it's a download number, it's a subscriber number maybe for YouTube, or an audio number of followers on Spotify. You're making that measurable. Achievable is the other one. I'll let you pick up on that one.
Oh my God, he's
going just go through the whole of the alphabet.
He's going down SMART goals, yes. Everybody. He's going down SMART goals. So specific, measurable, attainable, relatable, and time focused.
And it was only because you mentioned the time one that I thought, well, let's go down the SMART route.
Relatable, is that one? No, I've just made that up. That's a new version of SMART goals. I think it's realistic.
Realistic.
Rich.
Rich.
See where your head's going.
Let's go monetization.
But again, to sort of touch on that point that Al's made there, it's really imperative to know what the success of this podcast looks like in terms of a goal for you. Maybe it is that chart position. Maybe it is a number of downloads. Maybe it is a monetization. Because again, a lot of people, I think maybe it's a British thing. I don't think our American pals have got such an issue with it. I think when you talk about monetization with a British audience, it gets a bit uncomfortable, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit dirty words.
Categorically, this podcast that you are listening to right now, Start, Grow, Monetize Your Podcast, is a feeder into a free community And from that free, and there's loads of value in there, and we love the people that are in there. But that free community also then feeds into a paid community called PodSchool Pro. And our aim and our game is to monetize that content, is to monetize that audience ultimately by bringing so much value,
helping them and charging.
Absolutely. Yeah. A fraction of the price of the value that you're going to get, guys. Go check out PodSchool now. PodSchool Pro. Ding. But ultimately, that is what we're trying to do here. Yeah. And we have both said that we have got separate businesses, but we want a very big stream of our revenue to come via this podcast. Now, we are not looking at directly monetizing the podcast necessarily. You know, we might end up with some sponsors from... Rode microphones or the bloody energy drinks that you drink. Don't show it again, for God's sake. They've not paid us yet. Or Micah Arms or whoever it might be, or like an event or a show or
Kebab shop.
Yeah, I'm so hungry, by the way. I'm definitely having a kebab after this recording. But ultimately, we are going to monetize the content further down the line. I think it's really good, if it's relevant, to put a number on it. We know that via this content that we want to be making... circa £20,000 a month within the first year. Like, that's where we're ultimately trying to get it to. We've reversed engineered it. That's why we're putting out 2 episodes per week. That's why we're putting out so much content. That's why we've got a team that's working behind the scenes. We've got a shout out to Editor Joe, who's making a brilliant podcast for us. He's making fantastic clips. Your team, Magic Lorraine, is working
Richmond.
There's a bunch of people, our time as well. There's 5 people that are feeding this beast effectively. We called it a beast. That was a bit weird. But anyway, we'll skirt around it. But ultimately, I think it's good to have that monetization strategy, but only if it's relevant. If you are doing a podcast because you are passionate about helping something or a cause, or you just want to do it because it's your hobby, make your goal real for you. Mm-hmm. Don't set your metric based on somebody else's yardstick, because what would be the ultimate failure is to achieve the goal and realise that actually you didn't want the goal in the first place. To climb the ladder and realise the ladder was leaning on the wrong wall, which is so easy to do. Yeah. You don't necessarily need, look at people who are famous, quote unquote, who chase that fame and they chase the money only to get there and go, Jesus Christ, this was not everything that it was cracked up to be. Yeah. And with podcasting, do you want to be, what's the purpose? If you're saying, I want to be number 1 in the charts, great. But why?
It's not for everybody either.
But why? Yeah. Why do you want that? Do you want people to stop you in the street? Do you want to have your, whatever the goal may be? Now, again, you might be listening going, well, of course I want as big an audience as possible. But if you're a niche of a niche of a niche, and I know I've used this example a load of times because it is just so weird and so niche. We had a podcast client who was a ground investigation recruitment expert. He basically did short-term contracts for people who are specialists in deep piling. Niche of a 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 niche. His goal for that podcast was to get in front of the 25 companies that could ever utilise his service in the United Kingdom. And he'd done that within 6 months of launching his podcast. That was podcast success for him. He had a goal, he had a target, and he went and achieved it. 23 out of 25 ideal buyers for his services had appeared on his podcast within the first 6 months. Brilliant.
Podcast success.
That is absolutely podcast success. Would it have mattered to him if he'd have had a viral, which you're never going to have on, a deep piling podcast, by the way, as fun as it might be, guys, but you're never going to have a viral hit where millions of people will listen to that podcast episode. And also, if you did have that, would it actually drive the outcome that you're chasing, which is a business outcome?
No, not necessarily.
No, absolutely not. So, SMART goals are very, very effective. Is it specific, measurable, attainable? Is it realistic? And is it time bound? And I think also the other thing to look at with your podcast is there's almost like 2 elements to it. I would look at it in terms of setting your goal for the launch of this podcast.
Correct.
And then the ongoing outcome for that podcast, because how you start a podcast and how it sort of goes ongoing is a very different thing. And trust us, from people who've done, for ourselves, we've done hundreds and hundreds of episodes. For our clients, we've done probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of downloads. Tens of thousands of episodes edited for our clients. There will be a point in time where you have got that batch recording that you've done. You've ran out. A guest has let you down. Someone was sick. The editor couldn't get around to it. There will be that late night gig that you have to do. There'll be you've driven today for like 6-7 hours to come here, having done a school run. and then gone and dropped your kids down at some auditions, and then you've gone to go and meet, it sounds like the weirdest day ever, Piers Linney from Dragon's Den for lunch, in another part of London, driven from West London to East London to come and record this podcast. If we didn't have a goal for this content, you would be quite happily tucked up in bed, ready to go and get in the sea tomorrow morning. And frankly, you're probably annoyed that you're not going to be in the sea tomorrow morning. But that's because we've got a goal and a focus for the podcast. Otherwise, you do just sort of float about like a ship without an anchor, I think.
Very true. That is a really good point, because we were super specific when we started this, and we beta tested it in the summer, found out what people wanted. What they wanted was help in learning how to start, then grow, and then monetize their podcast in that order. We were being far too broad to start with, in that let's start a podcast group about podcasting.
Yes.
And what are the outcome? We want to help people, and we want to somehow make money from it at some point in the future. But because we crowdsourced our community that we built, because we crowdsourced and we asked them what they wanted, we could then work on that outcome. We could reverse engineer that outcome, and we could put our personal spin on it and how that affects our individual lives. What are we looking to achieve from committing this? Because as you said, we've committed a team, we've committed our own time, again, alluding to me making this long journey. Otherwise, if I wasn't motivated to do this, I could have left West London and just headed off home. But no, I am absolutely super committed to doing this, because we've seen other people do exactly the same thing in different niches, and we know this is eminently achievable. And because we've had such amazing experience with podcasting, it's changed both of our lives in many different ways. We want you to experience that same thing. And if you're interested, you're listening and watching this and wanting to learn how we did that. And look, the reason, again, as you said, the reason I started my podcast is very different from the reason after I launched it. To start with, it was just to get in a room with people I wouldn't normally get in a room and have a conversation with. The Piers Lenneys, the Daniel Priestleys, the Al Barretts, the Lord Billamores, the whoever's, to have those conversations and build my network. And
And just to give you some context, so that was, and Al talked about his sort of goal for his podcast a few times, and I think it's especially empowering because you hear the sort of the names of the people that you managed to get in the room with. Mine was completely different. I wanted to build out the podcast, building the brand, because I wanted it to position me as an expert authority in branding. You listen to that podcast and hopefully you go, well, this guy actually knows what he's talking about with branding. I started doing solo episodes, and I started getting people who would come through the door and go, how much do you charge to do consultancy? I now charge like 1,500 quid plus VAT for a 2 or 3 hour session, and people pay it again and again and again and again because, and I'm not saying that to show off, I'm just saying it to show what's possible when you have a specific goal. I never started building the brand as a podcast to try and compete with a Joe Rogan. I never wanted it to be, or never needed it to be, a mass market podcast. I wanted specific people who were in marketing, in branding, in PR, in business, in entrepreneurship to listen to that podcast, go, God, this kid knows what he's talking about. I say kid, 40 years old, man. But this guy knows what he's talking about. Let's have a conversation with him, go through his funnel, follow his content, whatever it may be, and ultimately then transact. Now, again, you might say, well, that goal sounds very transactional, James. It's not very aspirational. But at the time, I had just got rid of a best part of a 7-figure coaching business that I was running, and I needed cash. And I was like, well, the best way that I know to do that is to position myself as an expert authority, put content out there, and your podcast can really become a content engine. That is definitely an episode we should do coming up, by the way. I'm pointing at it very, very aggressively. I don't know why I'm being so angry with you. Don't let me forget Chisnall.
Let's just do it after this.
But yeah, we could do. But no, next week, wink, nudge, even though we've worn the same outfits for the last 10 weeks, if you've been watching in real time. But ultimately, getting real clarity on what I was trying to do made sure that I achieved that outcome. Because again, I've someone who's not traditionally, quote unquote, been good at setting goals. I've done quite well in a few different things, and I've done all right in a few different things, and I've had some big flops in a few different things. Probably more flops than successes. But ultimately, when you get clarity, like absolute tantamount, dot the I's, cross the T's, and know exactly where you're going.
Forensic
clarity that you can always make sure that you are heading in the right direction. Because honestly, starting a podcast without an understanding of who you're trying to do it for and why you're trying to do it, and the goal and the aspiration for you and your brand and your business and your life, is like going on a journey without a map.
And you'll get bored and you'll quit.
Oh, you 100% will. I remember there was one night in 2017, so just after I launched the podcast, and the podcast I was involved in, I went out to watch. This is really random, but to give you some context on why the goal is really important, I knew that podcast was getting real good results. It ended up in us going asked to go and do a keynote talk in South Africa, and it ended up with keynote talks in the UK, and spoke on stage with Les Brown and interviewed Grant Cardone, all this cool stuff. I went out. We've been late recording this 1 week. I went out for like today. I had gone out for like Christmas light switch on. Obviously eating something dodgy when we're out with the family and friends.
You were switching the Christmas lights on?
Yeah, I was there. Yeah, in Bromley, pop. No, so we'd gone to London to see the Christmas light switch on. Eating something dodgy, got food poisoning. I'm at Charing Cross train station at 6 o'clock in the evening, puking into the train tracks.
Too graphic.
Which was a lovely view for everybody. I got home that night and he was like, you need to go to bed. I was like, I need to edit the podcast. I sat up till midnight editing that podcast, being sick in a bucket, because that's how committed I was to the goal. If you don't want it bad enough that you won't be sick in a bucket and still carry on, then I question, should you even start a podcast?
Well, I thought this story was going to be about James switching on the Christmas lights with Grant Cardone and Les Brown in Miami or something, but clearly we've got a very different outcome.
Yeah, but there you go. The outcome that is the truth, but you need that goal to keep you on track when times get tough, because you'll go through the trough of sorrow, won't you? We've all been there.
Yeah.
Super excited around the launch of a podcast. 15, 20 episodes in, it's become commonplace. Those, your numbers maybe have stagnated a little bit. You haven't had that one sort of like hockey stick spike. And that goal is the thing that's going to keep you bloody going when it gets tough.
So action is, straight after this episode, go and write down what goal you have for your podcast. Whether you are looking to start your podcast, and we can maybe give you a clue on where to go for some help. Do you think?
Podcast.
Or you've already launched your podcast and you are looking to grow it, you're looking to monetize it, set a Dave Grohl for growth and set a goal for monetization.
Which you can also get support with in Pod School. Ding. Click the link in the show notes now. If you have enjoyed this episode, please feel free. Give us a 5-star review. I know we all say at the end of the podcast episode, but it's actually one of the things on the algorithm that actually helps, because Apple and Spotify and all the other platforms go, oh, this is good content. People have listened to it and they've liked it. So if you could, click on the episode right now, give it a 5-star review. I know it's not that easy to do it, but if you could do it for us, we'd massively appreciate it. Click subscribe on YouTube so you never miss an episode, and we will see you on the next installment of How to Start, Grow and Monetize Your Podcast.